The sound of dirt hitting the coffin was the loneliest sound Helena Edwards had ever heard, and she knew in that moment that the silence afterward would be even worse. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the small gathering at Clifton Cemetery, perched on a hillside overlooking the copper mines that had brought so many hopeful souls to this rugged corner of the territory. Helena stood rigid in her black dress, the fabric clinging to her skin in the September heat of 1887, watching as the last shovelful of earth covered her husband's grave. Thomas had been gone 3 days now, killed in a mine collapse that had taken 4 other men with him. They had been married only 8 months. The other widows knew what to say. They had been through this before in a mining town where death was as common as dust. They pressed her hands and murmured condolences, but Helena heard nothing. She was 22 years old and felt as though her life had ended before it truly began. She and Thomas had come west from Missouri with such dreams, such plans. Now those dreams were buried 6 feet under Arizona soil. "Mrs. Edwards, if there is anything you need," the minister said, but Helena simply nodded and turned away. She walked back to the small house she had shared with Thomas, each step feeling like she was moving through water. The front door creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, everything was exactly as it had been that morning when Thomas kissed her goodbye and headed to the mines. His coffee cup still sat on the table. His work jacket hung by the door. The silence wrapped around her like a shroud. The days that followed blurred together. Helena moved through the motions of living without truly being alive. She sold what she could to pay for the funeral and the debts Thomas had left behind. The mining company offered her a small settlement, barely enough to survive on for a few months. Other women in town invited her to church socials and quilting circles, but Helena declined. She could not bear their pitying looks, could not stand to be the object of their charity and gossip. She took in laundry and mending to make ends meet, her fingers working mechanically while her mind drifted to darker and darker places. At night, she lay in the bed that felt too large now, staring at the ceiling and wondering what purpose her life served anymore. She had no family left back in Missouri, no children, no reason to continue this painful existence. 6 weeks after the funeral, on a cold October evening, Helena made a decision. She would walk out into the desert at dawn and simply keep walking until the sun and the elements took her. It seemed easier than facing another day of this crushing loneliness, this feeling of being utterly adrift in a world that had no place for her. She went to bed that night with a strange sense of peace, knowing it would be her last. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The pounding on her door came just after midnight. Helena jerked awake, her heart racing. The pounding came again, urgent and insistent. "Mrs. Edwards, please, I need help." It was a man's voice, strained with pain or exhaustion. Helena hesitated, then lit a lamp and went to the door, keeping the chain latched. "Who is there?" she called. "Name is Dalton Young, madam. I have been shot. Please, I just need some water and somewhere to rest for a spell." Helena peered through the crack. In the lamplight, she could see a tall man leaning heavily against her doorframe, his hand pressed to his side where dark blood seeped between his fingers. His hat was pushed back, revealing a weathered face with strong features and eyes that held more pain than just the physical wound. Every practical instinct told her to send him away, to call for the sheriff, but something in those eyes stopped her. She saw in them a reflection of her own suffering, a kindred desperation. She unlatched the door. Dalton nearly fell into the room, and Helena caught his arm, surprised by her own strength as she helped him to a chair. Up close, she could see he was probably in his late 20s, with dark hair and the build of a man who worked hard for his living. His clothes were dusty from travel and his horse's reins were still wrapped around his hand. "Your horse," Helena said, "tied out front. She will be all right for now." He grimaced, pressing harder against his side. "I am sorry for disturbing you, madam. I saw your light and had nowhere else to go." Helena should have been afraid. She should have turned him out. Instead, she found herself moving to the stove, heating water, gathering clean cloths. It was the first time in weeks she had felt any sense of purpose. "Let me see the wound," she said. Dalton removed his hand, and Helena carefully lifted his shirt. The bullet had grazed his ribs, tearing a nasty gash but not penetrating deeply. She cleaned it as best she could while he sat rigid in the chair, his jaw clenched. "What happened?" she asked as she worked. "Got caught in the middle of someone else's fight in Mornsey. 3 men tried to rob a payroll wagon. I happened to be riding past, and one of them thought I was reaching for my gun when I was just trying to get my horse out of the way." He winced as she pressed a clean cloth to the wound. "The sheriff sorted it out eventually, but not before I caught a stray bullet." "Why did you not stay in Mornsey to get proper medical attention?" "The doctor there was dealing with one of the actual robbers who got shot worse than me. I figured I could make it to Clifton." He looked at her directly then. "I am a ranch hand. Been working at the Double R Ranch about 15 miles north of here. We deliver cattle to Mornsey regular, so I know these roads." Helena finished bandaging him, her hands steady despite everything. When she was done, she stepped back and really looked at him for the first time. There was something honest in his face, something decent. "You should rest here tonight," she heard herself say. "You can take the spare room." Dalton's eyes widened slightly. "Madam, I could not impose like that." "I can find the boarding house." "The boarding house is on the other side of town, and you have already lost enough blood. The spare room is empty. It would be no imposition." Her voice was flat, emotionless, but firm. He studied her for a long moment, and she wondered what he saw. A woman in a faded nightgown and wrapper, her blonde hair hanging loose down her back, her blue eyes empty of everything except a bone-deep weariness. "I am grateful, madam," he said quietly. Helena showed him to the small room where she had stored Thomas's things, the room they had planned to turn into a nursery someday. She gave Dalton a clean shirt that had belonged to her husband and left him to rest. Then she went back to her own room and lay down, expecting to feel nothing as usual. But instead, she felt a tiny flicker of something she could not quite name. For the first time in weeks, she had done something that mattered, even if it was just helping a wounded stranger. It was not much, but it was something. When morning came, she half expected Dalton to be gone. Instead, she found him in her kitchen, moving carefully as he made coffee on her stove. He had tended to his horse and brought in firewood from her nearly empty woodpile. "You should not be moving around," Helena said from the doorway. He turned, and she saw that his face was less pale than the night before. "I have had worse than this, madam, and I could not just lie abed while you have work to do. I saw the laundry you have got piled up." Helena felt a strange prickle of emotion. "You do not owe me anything, Mr. Young. I owe you my thanks at the very least, and please call me Dalton." He poured coffee into 2 cups. "If you do not mind my saying so, you look like you could use this more than I could." She accepted the cup, and they sat at her small table in awkward silence. The coffee was strong and hot, and Helena realized it was the first thing she had tasted in days that registered any flavor. "I should explain about last night," Dalton said finally. "I truly had nowhere else to go. The Double R is too far to make it in my condition, and I did not want to bleed all over the boarding house and cause a scene. When I saw your lamp burning so late, I took a chance that someone awake at that hour might understand desperation." He paused. "I can see I was right about that." Helena set down her cup. "What do you mean?" I mean, you have got the look of someone who knows what it is like to be lost." His brown eyes were gentle but direct. "I have seen it before in the war, men who kept moving but were not really living anymore." "You know nothing about me," Helena said, but there was no heat in her words. "You are right, I do not, but I recognize a kindred spirit when I see one." He stood slowly, favoring his injured side. "I should get on my way. I have taken enough of your kindness." "Wait." The word escaped before Helena could stop it. Dalton paused, looking at her questioningly. She did not know what made her say it, what impulse drove her, but suddenly she could not bear the thought of him leaving and the silence returning. "Your wound should be checked again before you ride 15 miles, and you should eat something." A slow smile crossed his face, the first real smile she had seen from him. It transformed his features, making him look younger and less burdened. "I would appreciate that, madam." "Helena," she said. "My name is Helena." Over breakfast, which consisted of eggs and biscuits that Helena was surprised she had the will to prepare, Dalton told her about himself. He had grown up in Texas, fought briefly in the Indian Wars, then drifted west looking for honest work. He had been at the Double R Ranch for 2 years, working as a horse wrangler and general ranch hand. He had no family left, just like her. "I am sorry," Helena said when he mentioned that last part. "It has been a long time. The pain fades, or so they say." He looked at her carefully. "I noticed the morning dress. If you do not mind me asking, how long has it been for you?" "6 weeks." Her voice was barely a whisper. "My husband died in the mines." Dalton nodded slowly. "That is fresh grief indeed. I am sorry for your loss, Helena." The way he said her name with such genuine compassion made something crack inside her chest. To her horror, tears began to stream down her face. She had not cried since the funeral, had not allowed herself to feel anything. But now, in front of this stranger, the dam broke. "I am sorry," she gasped, trying to wipe her eyes. "I do not know what is wrong with me." "Nothing is wrong with you. You are grieving." Dalton pulled his chair closer and handed her his handkerchief. "It is all right to let it out." And so she did. She told him everything through her tears. About Thomas and their dreams, about the crushing loneliness, about how she felt like she was drowning in a sea of emptiness with no shore in sight. She even told him about her plan to walk into the desert, the words spilling out in a rush. When she finished, Dalton was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and took her hand, his grip warm and solid. "I am glad I got shot last night," he said, "because it meant I knocked on your door and you did not walk into that desert this morning." Helena looked up at him through her tears. "Why would you care? You do not even know me." "Maybe not, but I know that feeling of wanting to give up. I felt it myself after the war, after losing everyone I cared about. I came close to eating a bullet more than once." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "What stopped me was a ranch cook who took the time to talk to me, to remind me that life still had moments worth living for. Even if they were just small moments at first. A good sunrise, a horse nuzzling your hand, the taste of hot coffee on a cold morning." "That seems like so little to live for," Helena whispered. "It is at first, but those little moments add up. They build into something bigger. You just have to stick around long enough to see it." He squeezed her hand gently. "Promise me you will stick around, Helena, at least for a while longer." She did not know why this man's opinion mattered to her. She had known him less than 12 hours. But looking into his earnest face, seeing the genuine concern there, she found herself nodding. "I promise," she said. Dalton stayed another hour, helping her with small tasks around the house despite her protests about his injury. Before he left, he wrote down directions to the Double R Ranch. "If you ever need anything, you send word," he said as he mounted his horse. "Or if you just need someone to talk to. The ranch is not so far." Helena stood in her doorway, watching him ride away, and for the first time since Thomas died, she did not feel completely alone. The days that followed were still difficult. The grief was still there. The loneliness still threatened to swallow her whole. But Helena kept her promise. She got up each morning and found those small moments Dalton had talked about. The way the light hit the mountains at dawn. The satisfaction of completing a mending job well. The taste of fresh bread she forced herself to bake. 2 weeks after Dalton's visit, a delivery boy brought a package to her door. Inside were supplies, coffee, flour, sugar, and a note in a masculine scrawl. "Thought you might need these. Stay strong. Dalton Young." Helena felt warmth spread through her chest. She had not asked for charity, but somehow this did not feel like pity. It felt like friendship, like someone remembering she existed in the world. She wrote him a thank you note and gave it to the supply wagon that made regular runs between Clifton and the northern ranches. 3 days later, another note arrived. This one was longer, telling her about life at the ranch, about a new colt that had been born, about the upcoming cattle drive to Mornsey. His words were simple but vivid, painting pictures that made her smile despite herself. She wrote back, and thus began a correspondence that became the highlight of Helena's days. Dalton's letters were full of life and humor and gentle encouragement. He asked about her work, her thoughts, her memories of better times. He never pushed, never pressed for more than she was willing to share. But slowly, carefully, he drew her out of her shell. November came, bringing cooler weather to the Arizona high country. Helena had begun to venture out more, attending church services and even joining a quilting circle. The other women still looked at her with pity, but she was learning to bear it. She was learning to live again, one small moment at a time. And then, on a crisp morning in late November, Dalton himself appeared at her door. "I hope you do not mind the visit," he said, turning his hat in his hands. "I had business in town and thought I would stop by, see how you are doing in person." Helena's heart beat faster. She had not seen him since that night he had been wounded, but his letters had made her feel as though she knew him. Still, seeing him in the flesh was different. He looked healthy and strong, his injury clearly healed. His eyes were as kind as she remembered. "I am glad you came," she said, and meant it. "Please come in." They sat in her parlor, and this time the conversation flowed easily. He told her about the ranch and the upcoming holidays. She told him about the sewing orders she had received, about the friends she was slowly making. They talked for hours, and Helena realized with a start that she was truly happy in this moment. When Dalton stood to leave, he hesitated at the door. "Helena, the ranch is having a harvest dance next week. Nothing fancy, just the ranch families and some folks from town. Would you consider coming as my guest?" Helena's first instinct was to refuse. It felt too soon, too improper. She was still in mourning. But then she looked at Dalton's hopeful face and remembered her promise. Small moments building into something bigger. "I would like that," she said. His smile could have lit up the entire territory. The week until the dance seemed to crawl by. Helena found herself thinking about Dalton constantly, wondering what it meant that she looked forward to seeing him again. She felt guilty at first, as though her growing happiness betrayed Thomas's memory. But when she really examined her feelings, she knew Thomas would not have wanted her to spend the rest of her life in grief. He had loved her too much for that. She altered one of her dresses, changing it from full mourning black to a deep gray. It felt like a significant step, a visible acknowledgement that she was moving forward. When Dalton arrived to escort her to the ranch, his eyes widened with appreciation. "You look beautiful," he said simply. The Double R Ranch was larger than Helena had imagined, with a sprawling main house and several outbuildings. The harvest dance was held in the biggest barn, which had been cleaned and decorated with lanterns and fall garlands. There were at least 50 people there, laughing and talking and enjoying the music provided by a fiddle player and a man on harmonica. Dalton introduced Helena to everyone with obvious pride. The ranch owner, Mr. Rutherford, was a gruff but kind older man who welcomed her warmly. The other ranch hands were respectful and friendly. Several ranch families had brought their children who ran around in delighted chaos. When the music started, Dalton offered his hand. "May I have this dance?" Helena hesitated. She had not danced since her wedding. But Dalton's eyes were so hopeful, and she had promised herself she would embrace these moments. "Yes," she said, placing her hand in his. He led her onto the makeshift dance floor, and as the fiddle played a simple waltz, they began to move together. Dalton was a decent dancer, if a bit rustic in his technique. But what he lacked in polish he made up for in consideration, guiding her carefully and keeping a respectful distance. "I am glad you came," he said as they turned. "I was not sure you would." "I almost did not," Helena admitted. "But I am glad I did. So am I." His hand tightened slightly on her waist. "Helena, I know this might not be the right time and I do not want to presume anything, but I need you to know that these past weeks, getting to know you through our letters, have meant a great deal to me. You have become very important to me." Helena's breath caught. She looked up into his face and saw nothing but sincerity there. "You have become important to me too," she said softly. "You saved my life that night, Dalton. Not just by giving me someone to help, but by showing me that life could still hold moments of connection and purpose. You saved me too, in a way, gave me a reason to write letters and think about someone other than myself." He smiled. "I look forward to your letters more than I have looked forward to anything in years." The music swirled around them, and Helena felt something shift in her heart. It was not the passionate, all-consuming love she had felt when she first met Thomas. This was different, steadier, deeper. It was the love of two wounded souls finding comfort and healing in each other. They danced 3 more dances, then sat together eating pie and watching the other dancers. Dalton's friends teased him good-naturedly about finally bringing a lady to one of their gatherings. Helena found herself laughing at their jokes, enjoying the simple pleasure of belonging somewhere again. As the evening wore on, Dalton and Helena slipped outside for some air. The November night was cool but not cold, and the stars overhead were brilliant in the clear desert sky. "It is beautiful out here," Helena said, hugging herself against the slight chill. Dalton shrugged off his jacket and draped it around her shoulders. The gesture was so natural, so caring, that Helena felt tears prick her eyes. "You have given me so much," she said quietly. "I do not know how to repay you." "There is nothing to repay. You gave me just as much." He stepped closer, his expression serious. "Helena, I want to keep seeing you if you will allow it. I know it has not been long since your husband passed, and I do not want to rush you. But I also do not want to hide how I feel." Helena's heart raced. She knew what he was offering: courtship, a future, a chance at happiness again. Part of her still felt guilty, felt like she was betraying Thomas. But a larger part, the part that Dalton had helped heal, knew that this was right. "I would like that very much," she said. "I cannot promise it will be easy. I still have difficult days when the grief feels like too much. I know. I am not asking for easy, I am just asking for a chance." He reached out and gently took her hand. "We can go as slow as you need." She squeezed his fingers, marveling at how safe she felt with him. "Thank you for understanding." They stood there in the starlight, hands clasped, and Helena felt something she had thought she would never feel again: hope for the future. December brought cold winds and occasional snow to the Arizona high country. Dalton visited Helena in town whenever his work allowed, which was usually once or twice a week. On the days he could not come, he sent letters that she treasured. Their courtship was gentle and unhurried. They took long walks together, talking about everything and nothing. He helped her with repairs around her small house. She mended his clothes and packed him lunches to take back to the ranch. Slowly, carefully, they built something real and lasting. The townspeople gossiped, of course. Some thought it was too soon after Thomas's death for Helena to be seen with another man. But most were kind, recognizing that loneliness was a harsh companion, and that life was too short and uncertain in the Arizona territory to waste time on false propriety. On Christmas Eve, Dalton took Helena to a candlelight service at the church. Afterward, standing outside in the cold night air, he gave her a small wrapped package. "It is not much," he said shyly, "but I wanted you to have something." Inside was a delicate silver locket. Helena opened it and found it empty, waiting for whatever memories she chose to place inside. "It is perfect," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Dalton." "I wanted to give you something that looked forward, not back," he said. "Something you could fill with new moments." She threw her arms around him, and he held her close, his chin resting on top of her head. In that embrace, Helena felt completely at peace. Winter gave way to spring, and with the warming weather came changes. Helena's mourning period was officially over, and she put away her gray dresses for colors again. It felt strange at first, wearing a blue calico dress, but Dalton's smile when he saw her made it worthwhile. "You look like a wildflower," he said, making her blush. They had their first real kiss on an April afternoon, standing by the creek that ran through the ranch property. Dalton had taken Helena on a ride to see the spring flowers blooming in the desert, and they had stopped to water the horses. The moment was perfect, the sun warm, the flowers bright, the sound of running water musical in the background. "Helena," Dalton said, turning to her with an expression that made her heart skip. "May I kiss you?" she answered by rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was sweet and tentative at first, then deeper as Dalton pulled her closer. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I love you," Dalton said. "I have loved you for months now, but I wanted to wait to say it. But I cannot wait any more. I love you, Helena Edwards." "I love you too," she replied, the words feeling absolutely right. "I did not think I could love again, but you showed me I was wrong." He kissed her again, and this time there was a promise in it. A promise of a future together, of happiness hard-won and all the more precious for it. As spring progressed into summer, Dalton and Helena began making plans. He wanted to marry her, and she wanted that too, but there were practical considerations. Helena's small house in town was not suitable for a ranch hand who needed to live closer to his work. And Dalton wanted to make sure he could provide properly for a wife. Mr. Rutherford, who had become fond of both of them, offered a solution. There was a small foreman's cottage on the ranch property that was currently empty. If Dalton would take on additional responsibilities as assistant foreman, the cottage would be theirs to live in. "The current foreman is getting on in years," Mr. Rutherford explained when he made the offer. "He needs help with the heavy work. You have proved yourself capable, Dalton, and I trust you. The cottage and a higher wage in exchange for taking on the extra duties. What do you say?" Dalton accepted immediately, and that night he proposed to Helena properly. He got down on one knee in her small parlor and offered her a simple gold band. "It is not fancy," he said, "but it is real gold, and it comes with a real promise. I will spend the rest of my life making you happy, Helena. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet and kissing him soundly. "Yes, yes, yes." They were married in August of 1888, almost a year after Dalton had first knocked on Helena's door bleeding and desperate. The ceremony was held in the same church where Helena had buried Thomas, but this time the building was filled with joy instead of sorrow. The townspeople who had pitied the lonely young widow now celebrated her second chance at happiness. The ranch families who had welcomed her into their community stood witness to her union with the man they all respected. Helena wore a simple white dress trimmed with lace, and Dalton wore a new suit that made him tug uncomfortably at his collar. But when they spoke their vows, his voice was steady and sure, and Helena's heart felt so full she thought it might burst. Mr. Rutherford hosted a celebration at the ranch afterward, with food and dancing and laughter that lasted well into the night. As Helena and Dalton took their first dance as husband and wife, she thought back to that dark October night when she had been ready to give up on life entirely. "What are you thinking about?" Dalton asked, seeing the faraway look in her eyes. "How different everything is from a year ago." "How you saved me." "We saved each other," he corrected gently. "You gave my life meaning again just as much as I gave yours hope." She laid her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, steady and strong. "I never thought I could be this happy again." "Neither did I, but here we are." He kissed the top of her head. "And this is just the beginning, Helena. We have a whole life ahead of us." They moved into the foreman's cottage the next day. It was small but well built, with a bedroom, a main room that served as kitchen and parlor, and a little porch that looked out toward the mountains. Helena immediately set about making it a home, hanging curtains and arranging the furniture they had combined from both their previous residences. Dalton threw himself into his new responsibilities as assistant foreman. The work was demanding, requiring long days and considerable expertise. But he had a natural way with both horses and men, and the ranch hands respected his leadership. Helena, for her part, became friends with the ranch wives and continued her sewing work, contributing to their household income. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. There were days when Helena still felt the shadow of her grief for Thomas, moments when guilt would creep in that she had moved on so thoroughly. But Dalton understood, never pressuring her or making her feel bad for her moments of sadness. He simply held her and reminded her that loving him did not diminish what she had felt for her first husband. There were also adjustments to married life itself. Dalton had lived alone for years and had his own set ways of doing things. Helena was used to running her own household. They had small arguments about how to arrange the furniture, about how much money to save versus spend, about whose family recipes to use for Sunday dinner. But these were normal marriage growing pains, and they navigated them with patience and humor. More importantly, they learned to communicate, to really listen to each other's needs and concerns. The foundation of friendship and respect they had built during their courtship served them well. As fall came again, marking the full year since Dalton had knocked on Helena's door, they took an afternoon to ride out to a quiet spot on the ranch where wildflowers still bloomed despite the cooling weather. "I want to tell you something," Helena said as they sat on a blanket, looking out at the desert landscape painted gold by the setting sun. "I am with child." Dalton's eyes widened, then his face split into the widest smile she had ever seen. "Truly, truly. I saw the doctor in Mornsey last week to be sure. He says the baby should come in late April or early May." Dalton let out a whoop of joy and pulled her into his arms, careful to be gentle. "A baby! We are going to have a baby," Helena laughed, caught up in his excitement. "I was worried at first about how you would react. I know we have not talked much about children." "Are you joking? This is the best news I have ever received." He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "A little person, made of both of us. It is a miracle, Helena." They sat together watching the sunset, making plans and dreaming about the future. Would it be a boy or a girl? What would they name it? How would they arrange the cottage to make room for a cradle? The pregnancy was not easy. Helena suffered from morning sickness that lasted well into her second trimester. The Arizona winter was particularly harsh that year, with heavy snows that sometimes isolated the ranch for days at a time. And there was always the underlying fear that something might go wrong, that she might lose this precious new life. But Dalton was wonderful through it all. He waited on her hand and foot, made her ginger tea for the nausea, kept the fire burning hot to ward off the cold. He read to her in the evenings and rubbed her swollen feet. He told her she was beautiful even when she felt like a whale. The ranch wives rallied around her too, sharing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. They threw her a small party in March, presenting her with a quilt they had all worked on together, each square sewn by a different woman. Helena cried happy tears as she examined the beautiful handiwork, overwhelmed by the love and community she had found here. Spring came, and with it the baby. Helena's labor started on a warm May afternoon while Dalton was out checking on the cattle in the far pastures. Mrs. Rutherford, who had attended several births, took charge immediately, sending one of the ranch hands to fetch Dalton and another to bring the doctor from Clifton. The labor was long and difficult. Helena had never experienced pain like this, and there were moments when she was frightened. But Mrs. Rutherford stayed with her, coaching her through each contraction, wiping her face with cool cloths. Dalton burst through the door just as the sun was setting, wild-eyed and terrified. "Helena, I am all right," she gasped between contractions. "But this baby seems determined to take its time." He stayed by her side, holding her hand and whispering encouragement. When the doctor finally arrived, he examined Helena and assured them everything was progressing normally, just slowly. It was nearly midnight when their son finally entered the world, announcing his arrival with a lusty cry that made both parents laugh with relief. The doctor placed the baby in Helena's arms and she looked down at the tiny, perfect face in wonder. "A boy," she whispered. "We have a son, Dalton." Dalton stared at his child with an expression of absolute awe. "He is perfect. You are perfect. Helena, you are amazing." They named him Daniel Thomas Young. Daniel for Dalton's father, and Thomas to honor the man whose death had inadvertently brought Helena and Dalton together. It felt right to Helena, a way of acknowledging the past while celebrating the future. Danny, as they quickly began calling him, was a healthy, happy baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. He transformed their little cottage into a home filled with crying and cooing, and the thousand small demands of infant care. Dalton proved to be a devoted father, getting up in the night to walk with Danny when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours just watching his son sleep. Helena fell even more in love with her husband as she watched him with their child. The first year of Danny's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and precious milestones. His first smile, his first laugh, his first tooth. Helena documented everything in a journal, filling the pages with memories she wanted to preserve forever. When Danny was 6 months old, Helena placed a tiny photograph of him in the locket Dalton had given her that first Christmas. On the other side, she placed a small photo of Dalton. Her past was not forgotten, but her present and future were what filled her heart now. As Danny grew into a toddler, the ranch continued to thrive. Dalton's work as assistant foreman had proved so successful that Mr. Rutherford made him full foreman when the old foreman retired. This came with an even better salary and more responsibility, but also more respect from the other ranch hands. Helena expanded her sewing business, taking special orders from wealthy families in Mornsey and even as far as Silver City. Her reputation for fine needlework spread, and she was able to contribute significantly to their growing savings. They talked about expanding their family, but it took several years before Helena conceived again. In the spring of 1892, when Danny was almost 4 years old, Helena gave birth to twin girls. The birth was even more difficult than Danny's had been, and there were some frightening moments when the doctor worried about Helena's ability to deliver 2 babies. But she was stronger now than she had been during her first pregnancy, more determined. And Dalton's presence gave her courage. The first twin arrived with relative ease, a tiny girl with blonde fuzz on her head. The second took longer, and by the time she arrived, everyone in the room was exhausted. But both babies were healthy, and Helena had never seen Dalton cry until the moment he held both his daughters in his arms. They named them Hannah Marie and Hope Louise. Hannah had her mother's coloring and delicate features. Hope looked more like her father, with darker hair and a sturdy build even as an infant. Life with 3 children under the age of 4 was chaotic. The cottage felt much smaller suddenly, and Helena and Dalton began saving in earnest for a larger house. Mr. Rutherford, generous as always, offered them a piece of ranch land where they could build, and Dalton spent his rare free time drawing up plans. Danny adored his little sisters, though he sometimes grew frustrated with how much attention they required. Helena made sure to spend special time with him, reading to him and taking him on walks while the babies napped. She was determined that all her children would feel equally loved. The years passed in the beautiful, exhausting rhythm of raising a young family. There were illnesses that terrified Helena until the doctor assured her the children would recover. There were accidents, like when Danny fell out of a tree and broke his arm, or when Hannah got kicked by a horse and had to have stitches. There were financial worries when the cattle market dipped, and personal worries when Mr. Rutherford's health began to fail. But through it all, Helena and Dalton's love for each other only deepened. They had built something real and lasting, a family that filled their home with laughter and love. On their 5th wedding anniversary, they stood on the porch of their still small cottage, watching their children play in the yard. "You remember when we first met?" Helena asked, leaning against Dalton's side. "How could I forget? I was bleeding all over your floor." He smiled and wrapped his arm around her waist. "Best night of my life, even with the bullet wound. I was going to walk into the desert the next morning. Did I ever tell you that? You did. And I thank God every day that I showed up when I did." He turned her to face him. "You have given me everything, Helena. A home, a family, a purpose. I love you more now than I did the day we married. I love you too." She reached up to cup his face. "You pulled me back to life when I was drowning in loneliness. You showed me that even after loss there could be joy again." They kissed as the sun set over the Arizona desert, their children's laughter providing a soundtrack to their love. In 1895, Mr. Rutherford passed away peacefully in his sleep. His children, who lived back east, had little interest in ranching and decided to sell the Double R. This could have been a disaster for Dalton and Helena, but Mr. Rutherford had provided for them in his will. He left them the piece of land where they had planned to build their house, along with a generous sum of money. More importantly, the new owners of the Double R recognized Dalton's value and asked him to stay on as foreman with a partnership stake in the operation. It was more than Dalton had ever dreamed possible when he first came west as a drifting ranch hand. With their improved financial situation, Helena and Dalton finally built the house they had been planning for years. It was not a mansion, but it was solid and spacious, with enough bedrooms for all the children and a big kitchen where Helena could work on her sewing projects. There was even a small office for Dalton to manage the ranch's books. They moved into the new house in the spring of 1896, and Helena hung the quilt the ranch wives had made for Danny's birth in the place of honor over the fireplace. It symbolized the community that had embraced her, the friends who had helped her heal and build this new life. Danny was growing into a fine young boy, responsible and kind-hearted like his father. He followed Dalton around the ranch whenever possible, learning everything he could about horses and cattle. The twins were 4 now, chattering constantly and getting into everything with the fearless curiosity of young children. Helena had put away her mourning for Thomas long ago, but she had not forgotten him. She sometimes told the children about their Uncle Thomas, the brave man who had helped their mother come west and who watched over them from heaven. It felt important to honor his memory, even as she celebrated the life she had built with Dalton. In the fall of 1897, Helena discovered she was pregnant again. She was 32 now, and this pregnancy felt different from the others. She was more tired, more easily overwhelmed. But Dalton was as supportive as ever, and the children, though young, tried to help in their own ways. This baby, another boy, arrived in May of 1898. They named him Jacob Rutherford Young, after no one in particular, but with a strong name that felt right. Jake, as he quickly became known, was a calm, peaceful baby who rarely cried and seemed content to watch the world with wide, curious eyes. With 4 children, life was never quiet. But it was full of love and laughter, of family dinners and bedtime stories, of teaching moments and precious memories. Helena had never imagined during those dark days of widowhood that she could be this happy, this fulfilled. On a summer evening in 1899, as Helena sat on the porch of their house watching Dalton play with the children in the yard, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. The pain of losing Thomas had been real and profound. But that pain had led her to Dalton, and together they had built something beautiful. Dalton caught her watching and smiled, that same warm smile that had first made her feel less alone all those years ago. He jogged over to the porch and sat beside her, taking her hand. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How grateful I am," she said simply, "for all of this, for you. The feeling is mutual." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it. "You are my everything, Helena. You and these beautiful children. I could not ask for more. Neither could I." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching their children play as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. Danny was teaching the twins how to skip stones in the small pond near the house, while baby Jake gurgled happily in his cradle on the porch. As the years continued to pass, the young family became a fixture in the Clifton community. Dalton's reputation as a fair and skilled foreman made the Double R one of the most successful ranches in the territory. Helena's sewing had evolved from a necessity into a thriving business, with clients coming from all over Arizona territory for her custom work. Danny grew into a teenager with his father's work ethic and his mother's compassionate heart. He was popular with the other ranch children and showed a natural talent for working with horses. The twins, now approaching their teenage years themselves, were as different as could be. Hannah was quiet and studious, always with a book in hand. Hope was adventurous and bold, more likely to be found climbing trees or racing horses than sitting still. Jake, the baby of the family, was now a lively 5-year-old who adored his older siblings and followed them everywhere. The age gap meant he was sometimes left behind, but Danny always made time for his little brother, teaching him to ride and rope just as Dalton had taught him. In 1903, when the family gathered to celebrate Helena and Dalton's 15th wedding anniversary, the house was filled with not just their own family, but the extended community they had built. Ranch families, townspeople from Clifton, Friends from near and far came to honor the couple who had become known for their kindness and generosity. As Dalton stood to make a toast, Helena looked around at all the people who filled their home and felt her heart swell with gratitude. This was the life she had built from the ashes of her grief. This was the community that had supported her, the love that had healed her. 15 years ago, Dalton said, his voice carrying across the room, I knocked on the door of a woman I had never met, desperate and wounded. She could have turned me away, but she did not. She let me in, and in doing so, she saved my life in more ways than one. He looked at Helena with such love that she felt tears spring to her eyes. Helena, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. Thank you for saying yes to that wounded cowboy all those years ago. Thank you for building this life with me. I love you more than words can say. The room erupted in applause and cheers. Helena stood and crossed to her husband, kissing him soundly despite their audience. I love you too, she whispered. Thank you for pulling me back to life when I was drowning. Thank you for showing me that love could bloom even in the desert. The party continued late into the night, with music and dancing and stories shared. The children ran wild with their friends, drunk on cake and excitement. Helena danced with Dalton, with Danny, with old Mr. Patterson from town who had been one of Thomas's friends and who had watched Helena's transformation with approval. As the last guests finally departed and the children were tucked into bed, Helena and Dalton stood together on their porch, looking up at the stars. You ever think about how different things could have been? Helena asked. If you had not been shot that night? If you had gone to the boarding house instead of knocking on my door all the time, Dalton admitted. And it terrifies me, because I cannot imagine my life without you and the children, but I also believe that somehow, some way we would have found each other. We were meant to be, Helena. I believe that too. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Everything I went through, all the pain and loss, it led me to you. And I would go through it all again if it meant ending up here in this moment with this life we have built. Dalton pulled her close, and they stood there in the warm summer night, two souls who had found each other in the darkest of times and built a love that would last forever. The years continued their steady march forward. Danny grew into a man, eventually taking a position as a ranch hand on a spread near Tucson. He promised to visit often and to write regularly. Helena cried when he left, but was proud of the fine young man he had become. The twins blossomed into beautiful young women. Hannah, true to her studious nature, became a teacher at the Clifton schoolhouse. Hope, adventurous as ever, surprised everyone by falling in love with and marrying a traveling photographer. She moved to Phoenix with him but came home often, always with new stories of their adventures. Jake grew up with the ranch in his blood, working alongside his father and learning everything about running a successful cattle operation. Dalton began teaching him about the business side of things too, preparing him to eventually take over. In 1910, Helena and Dalton became grandparents for the first time when Danny's wife gave birth to a baby girl. They made the journey to Tucson to meet her, and Helena held her granddaughter with tears of joy streaming down her face. We have come so far, she told Dalton that night in their hotel room, from two broken people to this, a family that spans generations. All because you opened your door to a bleeding stranger, Dalton said with a smile. All because you showed me that life was still worth living, Helena corrected. More grandchildren followed over the years. Hannah married a banker from Mornsey and had 3 children in quick succession. Hope and her photographer husband had twins, much to everyone's amusement. Even Jake eventually married a sweet girl from one of the neighboring ranches and started his own family. Through it all, Helena and Dalton remained the center of their growing family. Their house was always open, always welcoming. Sunday dinners became a tradition, with the table extended to its maximum length and still barely holding everyone. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1918, the family threw them a massive celebration. There were now 10 grandchildren, ranging from infants to teenagers. The house and yard were filled with family and friends, a testament to the life Helena and Dalton had built. As Helena looked around at all the faces, she marveled at how far she had come from that lonely widow drowning in grief. She had been given a second chance at life, at love, and she had seized it with both hands. That night, as she and Dalton prepared for bed, she looked at herself in the mirror. She was 53 now, her blonde hair streaked with silver, fine lines around her eyes and mouth. But those lines came from laughter, from smiles, from a life well lived. "What are you thinking?" Dalton asked, coming to stand behind her. He was 59 now, his dark hair more gray than black, his body still strong from years of ranch work but showing the signs of age. "I am thinking about how beautiful life is," Helena said. "How grateful I am for every day we have had together." "We have many more days ahead of us," Dalton said, wrapping his arms around her waist. "I know, and I plan to treasure every single one." They continued their lives with the same love and dedication they had always shown. Dalton remained active in running the ranch well into his 60s, though he gradually turned more and more responsibility over to Jake. Helena continued her sewing for as long as her eyes and fingers allowed, though she eventually had to limit herself to simpler projects. They took pleasure in watching their grandchildren grow, in seeing their own children become confident, capable adults. They took long walks together in the evenings, hand in hand, talking about everything and nothing. They still danced in their kitchen when the mood struck them, moving slowly but with joy. In 1925, as they approached their 37th anniversary, Dalton's health began to decline. The years of hard ranch work had taken their toll on his body. He developed a persistent cough that the doctor diagnosed as a lung condition, likely from years of breathing in dust and smoke. Helena nursed him carefully, but they both knew he was slowing down. On his better days, they would sit on the porch together, watching the sunset over the ranch they had built their life around. "I have no regrets," Dalton told her one evening as they sat together. "Every moment with you has been a gift." "Do not talk like that," Helena said, though she knew he was being realistic. "You have years left in you yet, perhaps, but I want you to know just in case." He took her hand, his grip still strong despite his illness. "You made my life complete, Helena. Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my existence. And loving you has been mine." She blinked back tears. "You saved me, Dalton. You pulled me back from the brink and showed me that life could be beautiful again." "We saved each other," he said, just as he had so many years ago. "And whatever time we have left, I want to spend it exactly like this. With you." He rallied for a time, enjoying one more Christmas with the family, one more round of grandchildren visiting and filling the house with noise and laughter. But in the early spring of 1926, his condition worsened rapidly. The family gathered, knowing the end was near. Helena never left his side, holding his hand and whispering words of love. Their children sat vigil with them, along with many of the grandchildren who were old enough to understand. On a mild March evening, with the first wildflowers of spring blooming outside the window, Dalton Young passed away peacefully, surrounded by his family. His last words were to Helena, "Thank you for saying yes." The grief was profound but different from what Helena had experienced when Thomas died. She had been young then, unprepared for loss, drowning in loneliness with no anchor. Now she was 60 years old, and while the pain of losing Dalton was immense, she was not alone. She had children and grandchildren who loved her. She had a lifetime of beautiful memories to sustain her, and she had the knowledge that she and Dalton had lived their love fully, holding nothing back. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half the territory. Dalton had touched many lives in his years as foreman and community member. Person after person came to Helena with stories of his kindness, his fairness, his wisdom. She listened to each one, treasuring these glimpses of how her husband had impacted the world. After the funeral, Helena's children worried about her living alone in the big house. But she was adamant that she would stay in the home she and Dalton had built together. This was where their memories lived, where she felt closest to him. She lived there for another 12 years, maintaining her independence with the help of her family. Her grandchildren visited often, and as they grew older, they brought their own children to meet her. She became the matriarch of a large and loving family, the keeper of stories and traditions. She never remarried, never even considered it. Dalton had been her second great love, and she was content with the time they had shared. She kept his photograph on her bedside table, along with the one of Thomas. Both men had shaped her life in profound ways. On quiet evenings, she would sit on the porch and remember. She remembered that desperate night when a wounded cowboy had knocked on her door. She remembered her first tentative steps back toward life. She remembered falling in love again, building a family, creating a legacy of love and compassion. In the spring of 1938, at the age of 72, Helena passed away peacefully in her sleep. Her children found her in the morning, a slight smile on her face, the locket Dalton had given her so many years ago clutched in her hand. The family gathered once more, now spanning 4 generations. As they laid Helena to rest beside Dalton, the minister spoke of a love that had conquered loneliness and despair, that had built something lasting and beautiful. Danny, now a silver-haired man in his 50s, spoke at the service. "My mother came to Arizona as a young bride full of dreams," he said. "Those dreams seemed to die when her first husband passed. But then she met my father, and together they built something even greater than those first dreams. They showed all of us what true love looks like. Not just the passionate beginning, but the daily choice to love and support each other through everything life brings. That is their legacy to us." As the family gathered at the house afterward, sharing food and memories, they looked at the photographs Helena had kept on the mantel. There was one of her and Thomas on their wedding day, young and hopeful. There was one of her and Dalton with baby Danny. There were countless others documenting the life she had lived, the family she had raised, the love she had shared. The youngest great-grandchildren ran through the house, their laughter echoing off the walls. The older ones sat with their parents and grandparents, listening to stories about great-grandma Helena and great-grandpa Dalton. About how they had met, how they had fallen in love, how they had built this family from the ashes of loss and loneliness. And in those stories, Helena and Dalton lived on. Their love story became part of the family lore, told and retold to each new generation. A reminder that even in the darkest times, hope could bloom. That compassion could heal the deepest wounds. That love, when nurtured and cherished, could create something that lasted far beyond a single lifetime. The house eventually passed to Jake, who raised his own family there and eventually his grandchildren. The ranch continued to thrive, now run by the 3rd generation of Youngs. And every spring, when the wildflowers bloomed in the Arizona desert, the family would gather to remember the widow who had been drowning in loneliness and the compassionate cowboy who had pulled her back to life, creating a love story that would inspire their descendants for generations to come. Their story was one of second chances and redemption, of finding light in darkness and building joy from sorrow. It was a testament to the healing power of compassion and the transformative nature of true love. And it all began with a knock on a door on a desperate October night, when two broken souls found each other and began the journey back to wholeness together.